Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, Iran says nuclear talks are encouraging, but U.S. warships are gathering in the region.
Donald Trump's repeatedly threatened military action on Iran if a deal isn't reached on its nuclear program.
So where are negotiations really headed? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Before we go on with today's show, we want to know if you're following the U.S.-Iran tensions and what questions you might want answered. Leave us a comment and join the discussion. And if you listen on your podcast app, a quick review goes a long way in helping others find The Take. Thanks.
I'm Sina Toossi. I'm a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy, a think tank in Washington, D.C., and I write about and do research about U.S.-Iran relations, U.S. policies towards the Middle East, and the domestic situation inside of Iran.
Well, Sina, welcome to The Take. It's good to have you and your expertise here. We are speaking on Wednesday, February 25th, a day after U.S. President Donald Trump's State of the Union. And a lot of people were paying close attention to what he said about Iran.
They were warned to make no future attempts to rebuild their weapons program, and in particular, nuclear weapons. Yet they continue. They're starting it all over. We wiped it out, and they want to start all over again.
Despite this alleged wipeout of Iran's nuclear program, the U.S. is reportedly assembling its largest military concentration of air power since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. So help me make sense of this. Why are we hearing talk of potential war and seeing the buildup of U.S. military assets in the region? At the same time, we're seeing talks.
I think there's a lot of context to why Trump has this approach towards Iran. And he really, I would characterize it as an obsession to people just observing this. It seems irrational. It seems, as you said, why is the U.S. getting to the cusp of this big war with Iran again? And I think the most important context is going back to Trump's first term, where he ran his campaign in 2016, calling Barack Obama's signature foreign policy achievement, which was the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, which Obama negotiated over the course of years. And that deal was a deal that was widely hailed by nuclear nonproliferation experts, the arms control community, the International Atomic Energy Agency, as being a good deal for preventing Iran's nuclear program from being weaponized. And, that deal was a quid pro quo. It was supposed to give Iran sanctions relief. It came into effect actually in January 2016, the same year that Trump was campaigning on calling it the worst deal in history. Trump, what he opted to do is leave that deal in 2018, pursue this maximum pressure campaign, really deteriorating economic conditions in Iran. Many of us said that the predictable outcome of this approach is going to be either war, instability, and a deal that, if Trump pushes towards diplomacy, there's certain maximum gains that he can only hope to gain. And he's always said that he wants a deal. He wants a better deal. But in practice, what his policies have done is really create a more destructive, volatile environment inside of Iran. Really, more Iranians have been pushed from the middle class of poverty just since 2018. And there's a direct correlation with U.S. sanctions. And so that's obviously created a much more volatile, disruptive situation. And now we're in a situation where Trump was pursuing negotiations with Iran last spring. He had 5 rounds of talks, and then Israel launched a surprise attack on Iran last June in the middle of those talks. Trump did join that attack for one strike on the nuclear facilities and then pushed for a ceasefire, and that war ended in 12 days. And now we're here months later, and Trump is again on the cusp of war within Iran. And many of us have said that the Iranian nuclear program is deeply entrenched. It's buried underground. And it's a massive program. It's not a small program of like small number of scientists. Iran has really built an industrial grade nuclear program since 2003. It's had multiple facilities, thousands of people who worked on it, scientists, the know-how is there, thousands of centrifuges that enrich uranium. So What the nuclear strikes did last summer was ostensibly destroy the facilities, at least the above ground facilities, but it's really pushed Iran's nuclear program in the shadows. They've kicked out the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors, and it's really unverifiable what is the state of the nuclear program. We know that they still have their stockpiles of enriched uranium. And so now we're at the cusp of, having to go to a war again for a alleged Iranian nuclear weapon, which they've never had.
Sina, we have covered this drumbeat of war coming from the U.S. towards Iran for a while now. And each time we do, all of my guests, rightly so, start in 2015, 2016 with the Iran deal, with Trump saying it was a bad deal and reneging on it. And then we end up here. And so I'm wondering for you, as you were watching the State of the Union and U.S. President Donald Trump, as talk of war continues, what goes through your head as you're watching him say those words?
Yeah, for me, this was, it just shows how much of Trump's Iran policy and approach towards the region has really had a dead end. I mean, this was really a crisis of his own making, that he left the deal. He didn't have a good alternative. He said he wanted more negotiations and another deal, but instead, he got pushed into a war. I mean, a war that was of his own making, but he surrounded himself with very hawkish, warmongering advisors. He gave Netanyahu a blank check to do what he wanted. And so now we're in this position where Trump, again, is weighing a major war, this time a bigger war that could prove to be a huge quagmire for America and ultimately not lead to some of the desires that the administration has, like a better deal or destroying the nuclear program, but it could really just lead into a kind of regional conflict and a bigger, costly conflict for America than the one we saw last June.
Okay, well, beyond the posturing, there is actual diplomacy that is happening. U.S. and Iranian negotiators are meeting in Geneva on Thursday to discuss a draft Iranian proposal for a nuclear deal. So on the one hand, we've got Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian talking about encouraging signals. On the other hand, you have Trump saying he's considering a limited strike if no deal is reached. And for the rest of us looking on, outside, but also in Iran, I imagine even more so, this back and forth feels like whiplash. When you look at all of that together, how do you understand this moment?
There's a lot of, psychological warfare going on as well. And this is a big part of this story where we can see just in the past 2 months, I mean, what the Iranian people are experiencing. I cover and follow a lot of what's going on in Iran, and people are just, it's dizzying that even people who hope for a better future and are fed up with this government and, the oppression that they face domestically, that every day is like, is America going to strike? Is it not going to strike? The impact that has on the market, on the price of food, on the currency, all these things. And so now Trump, he's under this illusion where he's been someone who's kind of campaigned on being against, big wars, Middle East wars. He criticized, the Iraq war in 2016. This time he kind of presents himself as the peacemaker and the deal maker, which obviously is not true. And then, what Trump is a master at is kind of the political optics of it. He'll present the reality he wants it to be, regardless of whether it is the reality. Like, oh, we obliterated the program. So we'll see if he's under the illusion that this could be a limited strike. That is seemingly his preference. But the Iranians have said, because they don't want to come under this situation where they're getting attacked every 6 months. So they've said they're going to go much higher in their retaliation that they did last time. Even though last time, they hit back in a hard way against Israel and against this U.S. base in Qatar. But now the Iranians are saying that regardless of if the attack against them is limited or not, they're going to hit back in a hard way. So the risk of a major escalation is much higher this time, I would argue.
So then for someone in your position, are you watching Thursday's talks with bated breath? Like, take me through what that looks like for you.
Yeah, I think, what's different this time is that it really seems that the U.S. and Iran are at this kind of either big war or a deal moment. That we've had this period of kind of like the status of limbo where Iran is under maximum pressure. The economy is deteriorating. Its nuclear program was expanding, but there was no war. There was no peace. It was obviously really bad for the Iranian people and the economic situation in Iran. But there was this festering instability with this status quo between the U.S. and Iran. So now it really is at a breaking point, I would argue, that with this military buildup, with Trump's threats, that it's either they're going to get some kind of breakthrough diplomatic agreement, which I think regardless of the reality of the terms of that agreement, Trump is going to frame in a big way. I was tough, and there is one interpretation that Trump's buildup is kind of a bluff, that he doesn't actually intend to get in a big war, but he's trying to pressure the Iranians into giving more concessions. But perhaps even more so than that, he's trying to present himself politically that, look, I was so tough. I did this big buildup. And again, regardless of the reality of it, I got a great deal. I got a better deal than Obama. And that may be also what could happen. But I think, these talks on Thursday in Geneva are going to be a big thing to track. If something actually comes of them, and if a deal can quickly materialize, or if they fall apart and, an attack occurs.
Yeah. So you mentioned some of how this lands in Iran. I'm wondering about here in the U.S., because you appeared on Bill O'Reilly's No Spin News this week. Now, he's the former Fox News host and journalist and conservative commentator. And in this segment on YouTube, he said, it's incredibly complicated and dangerous to attack Iran. And I think that might surprise some people. It kind of surprised me. And he added that he's talked to President Trump about the issue.
I've talked to the president myself about the issue, that he doesn't fear the government of Iran. They don't fear it. What they fear is that it's Ramadan, that dead Persian civilians will ignite the region because, of course, they'll be on television, and that their instability and unintended consequences of all the civilian deaths might put things out of control.
So I'm wondering, Sina, about the reception you've seen from liberal versus conservative media and commentators here in the U.S. when it comes to this appetite for war in Iran.
Yeah, it's very fascinating, actually, because as you said, people like Bill O'Reilly or Tucker Carlson, I would add in that mix, these were all Fox News hosts, and many of them were very explicit and outspoken in supporting U.S. military attacks and interventions and wars abroad. So to me, it's just been fascinating. Like you said, I went on Bill O'Reilly's program, and he is now also very critical of getting in a war with Iran. He talked with Trump, he said, and he pushed for a deal with Trump. He said it'd be better to make a deal. Tucker Carlson obviously is even more outspoken. So it seems like, at least on a part of the right, and even the American right wing's kind of traditional talking heads on Fox News back in the day, that they've had this interesting pivot where they were more close to kind of the neoconservative camp back when they worked at, Rupert Murdoch's Fox News. And now, when they're independent or kind of semi-retired, I don't know if this is their true beliefs coming out, or they really have learned the lessons of the past several decades of these wars being bad for America, being quagmires, not resulting in anything good for, any rational definition of American interests. But when it comes to the rest of the media, I mean, you see in a lot of the legacy media, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, I would argue that they actually haven't necessarily, I mean, I don't want to generalize, there's plenty of good journalists at all these outlets, but when it comes to a lot of the broader reporting on Iran, I would argue there's still a lot of cliche, there's still a lot of kind of reflexive demonization of Iran. Things that, in the run up to the Iraq war, people are in retrospect very critical of, and, all the failures of the media and holding the government to account and checking its claims. I don't really see necessarily, that kind of rigorous checking of Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program. Trump said it was obliterated. Why are we going to war now? The media needs to check these claims. Is this war going to benefit the Iranian people, or is this war going to collapse the state or push the region to conflict and result in a refugee crisis? These more likely scenarios, arguably. And I don't really see that rigorous check by the media, by the mainstream media, the legacy media, the major newspapers, that I would argue needs to be there at this moment that could be very consequential.
We'll have more with Sina after the break. Sina, I want to turn now to Iran and the region, because at the same time as these talks in Geneva are to happen, scattered student protests have resumed in Tehran despite the deadliest crackdown on demonstrators in years this past January. People are braving those risks and they are gathering again, this time at memorials for the thousands of people who were killed earlier this year. And they're demonstrating again against the government. How much does this internal pressure factor into the Iranian government's decision-making right now? Does the government need this deal?
Yeah, I think first, the most important thing is that, Iran has had an organic, grassroots-led movement for social change, for political change, for getting to democratic representative governance. And especially under this current government, this repressive Islamic Republic government that, hasn't been able to provide economic rights to its people that they want and expect. The economic situation has greatly deteriorated. The political situation has been very restrictive for many years, many social restrictions. So the Iranian people, especially young people, they've had many deep-seated grievances going back years that have nothing to do with, American pressure, Israeli pressure. But obviously, we're in a context where American and Israeli governments are trying to exploit this sentiment and move it towards their interests. So we've seen that, Trump, in the midst of these protests, in an effort to escalate them, came out with numerous tweets and statements. One saying early on, we're locked and loaded. If they kill protesters, we're going to hit them. And then, later on saying, Iranian people, go take your institutions. We're with you. Help is on the way. And then what happened next? A lot of people got killed. B, Trump then the following week basically laundered the Iranian government's narrative. They said they're not executing people. And then he entered negotiations with the Iranian government, just basically making it appear that the whole thing was just a ruse to get a lot of Iranians killed, to increase pressure on the Iranian government, to increase leverage, to just get a better deal with this government that these people are protesting. So it's very cynical. It's an exploitation of the Iranian people. And it just shows that for these outside governments, they don't care about these people. They're like these two elephants, that are fighting. I mean, the Iranian government's a much smaller elephant, but still, and then these people in the middle are being trampled on and used and exploited. And it's very tragic.
Well, finally, Sina, I want to end with the people, because you put it so eloquently when you talked about two elephants, one a little smaller than the other, but elephants trampling and the ones being trampled, the people in Iran. What are you hearing from your friends, your family, your contacts in Iran, especially given the fact that we know that it is difficult to hear voices out of Iran because of various factors, either the internet being cut or the repression or the fear factor of what it might mean to speak out? What are you able to glean from people who are there about what they want and what they're feeling right now?
So I'm of Iranian heritage. I have a lot of family still in Iran, and I'm in regular touch with them and friends in Iran. And the biggest thing that I hear is worry and fear that they've been in this terrible situation, terrible conditions, economic conditions. Like I've had, people I speak to there who are just a basic kind of middle-class lifestyle that they no longer have. And so there's a lot of anger and grievance, that is very palpable amongst many Iranians that have pushed many people, I would say, combined with a lot of other factors, including the outside disinformation campaigns that target them, which are massive, certain satellite TV channels and figures abroad that basically tell them a message of easy victory. And you can go, for example, Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former dictator, the Shah, who was ousted in 1979, who said, go seize your city centers. And a lot of people got killed, but, under this illusion that foreign intervention can come and, may very cleanly and easily improve their situation. When in reality, that's not the situation. And many people understand this. So many people I talk to are absolutely not supportive of any kind of foreign intervention. even though they don't like the Islamic Republic or they want fundamental political change in their country, they're certainly not pinning their hopes on foreign intervention. And you also see this in the statements and rhetoric of a lot of the domestic opposition and dissidents who've put out a lot. They don't get as much coverage in the Western press as compared to someone like Reza Pahlavi, who does support, he's the exiled prince, he supports military intervention. But those domestic actors are very strongly against foreign intervention. They put out statements, they put out, they've been organizing, but they don't unfortunately get as much coverage in the Western debates.
Well, Sina, thank you for being an amplifier of that viewpoint and of their views, and for your analysis on this as we continue to watch what might unfold as these talks happen. Thank you, Sina. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.